In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the best way I found to bake a normal map for meshes with different shading. Baking a good normal map relies on a combination of topology, shading, face normals orientation, UV map, texture resolution, color space, margin or padding, and a good cage object if you need it. A normal map describes the illusional geometry of the mesh. However, shading also affects the look of your geometry. Shading is a way a surface reflects the light. Shading is made by normals. Generally, shading of the mesh can be flat, smooth, or combined. An incorrect shading will be exposed in your game engine. Before you bake your normal map, you have to make sure the shading of the mesh looks realistic and conforms to topology. It also depends on how you want your geometry flow to look like. Let's take a cylinder, for example. There are two ways we might want our cylinder look in the game. We can have it with hard edges, or, for another reason, we want it to be rounded. Both shadings are correct because they reflect the light in the most possible realistic way. Let's take a shape with shading like this. With this shading, there is no way it will reflect light realistic if it is all smooth. It might look okay in Blender after you bake the normal map, but it'll look much different in a game engine. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with the normal map. The normal map is actually alright. It is all about the way a 3D engine reads the normal map. In Unreal Engine, it will look in the mesh exactly like it is. For this mesh, a proper normal map should look like this, because it's best to choose flat shading for such shape. The thing is, when you bake a normal map, it combines the normals of the both meshes, which means the baking process takes the normals of the low poly mesh into consideration as well. If the faces of the mesh are flat or smooth, it will be shown on the normal map. After you've baked and applied your normal map, you also shouldn't change own shading on the mesh, as it will lead to shading errors. If you decide to choose different shading, you'll have to rebake your normal map. Let's bake a normal map for cube with hard edges. Create 1K texture to make a quick test bake. Set 32 bits and non-color for color space. If we take a cube with a standard UV map and bake straight ahead, we'll get quite noticeable seams. Alright, let's bake with using a cage. The visible seams are still there. Let's change the UV map. Switch to Edge Select. With all edges selected, choose Mark Seam. We need to mark every angled edge as a UV seam. Unwrap the mesh. It's not necessary in this case, but I usually select Conformal to have less stretching. Set margin to 0.01 after you unwrap your UV map. Great, let's try baking with a high resolution as well. This way it covers more pixels and the seams are least noticeable. 8K is way more than enough, but it's good to notice the difference. After, you can decrease the resolution to what is the best in terms of performance and desirable quality. Save your normal map with 15 or 100% compression. It won't lose quality, but the size. Actually, the seams are still there, but they're barely noticeable. It's really important to have a good cage for your baking. In fact, its topology matters, as well as its position according to the low poly and high poly mesh. A cage is an inflated version of the low poly, and it must cover the both high poly and low poly mesh. If we have a cube, we can just scale the cage and bake the normal map. However, when we deal with a complex mesh, scaling won't be the best solution. So in this case, you can use the Displace modifier. Check your face normal's orientation as well. If it is all blue, the modifier will be applied properly. In this example, we're creating a mesh with combined shading. This example is relevant to one of those by the link in the description. Start with a cube, bevel an edge. Select the faces to be smoothed. Instead of selecting Shade Smooth, go to Mesh, Normals, Merge. This way it will be smoothed correctly. Unwrap it accordingly. Looks okay, no stretching. The UV map also covers most of the square. Now prepare the cage mesh. If you want to sculpt a high poly mesh but preserve most of the shading, you should do it either with multi-resolution or subdivide your high poly mesh in advance. If I use Dyn Turbo straight ahead, I'm going to ruin my shading, even with smooth shading on. So, to preserve most of the overall shading, I combine Subsurf modifier and edge grease before I start sculpting. It doesn't solve the problem entirely, but it helps keeping smooth surface and give you more control over the sculpting process. I'm gonna sculpt some details. Now bake your normal map with using your cage. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. I wish you to have good looking normal maps, correct shading, and all the best with your workflow. Please leave your comments if you have questions or question this approach. Have your suggestions and have a good luck. Thank you again.